This week, Ferguson has looked like a police state.
It's not funny to us.
The anger.
What we gonna do about tomorrow, sister?
The confrontations. And most of us never saw it coming. But the deep resentment and feelings of isolation and oppression have been there for a very long time.
You can read about things in the paper, but it means nothing to you if you don't live there and understand the outcry.
Right now, our neighborhoods are war zones like never before.
A year ago, James Clark, a vice president of Better Family Life, told me decades of neglect in some of our most vulnerable communities was creating so much anger and unrest that if it wasn't addressed, it could explode, just like what happened in Ferguson.
And our young people are becoming more and more brazen. So we've got to get very, very serious, or we will see St. Louis almost come to a state of lawlessness.
There's a 45 minutes in between your eyes.
Some of it is based on the way people, especially African Americans, are treated by some cops. Like this example in Brooklyn, Illinois, captured by a camera on a local officer.
Like a airplane. Go ahead and cuff him.
In Ferguson and many other communities, police are far more likely to pull over black drivers and search them, even though a report by the Missouri Attorney General's office says whites are more likely to have drugs on them.
They killed my baby boy.
During our investigations over the last decade, many residents in some of the region's poorest and most violent neighborhoods have told us they don't trust the police.
Police won't do nothing. Come on now. But they say they still looking for them. You're not looking for them.
And that the cops often treat them with little respect.
3 of my sons has been shot.
Kimberly Schooler's 21-year-old son Jordan was shot and killed in East St. Louis. But despite that, she refuses to cooperate with police on any other case. If you knew who shot somebody, you wouldn't tell the police?
No, because they're not going to do nothing. So you put your own life in danger because they're not going to protect you. They don't care nothing about you. That
belief doesn't reflect the view of all residents, but it does echo the lack of trust in law enforcement and the fear of some of her neighbors. During our documentary, A Vicious Cycle, we explored the pushback toward cops. Terrell Golson, who died since our interview, was a former gang leader and enforcer.
20 years ago, you'd be running and trying to hide and all that from the police. Yeah, back then you would.
Not today.
No, today is what it is, you know what I'm saying? You up yours, I'm up mine, we're going to see who get the first draw, you know?
But that's only part of the problems in the areas James Clark talked about.
No one feels safe today.
When you combine that with extreme poverty, high unemployment, low percentages of home ownership, and single-parent families that move frequently, creating even more instability, and then add racial segregation and the feeling by a race of people that they are isolated, you have an environment that is stressful and broken to a degree that many of us can't imagine unless we live there and experience it every day.
We can either sit back and continue to watch our society spiral out of control, or we can say, let's get smart about it and let's begin to do things differently, because the way that we do things today is not working.
You must leave the area.
What kind of weapon is that?
They look like soldiers in a war zone.
I've never seen one outside the military.
But they are mostly local cops from St. Louis County.
You must disperse in a peaceful manner.
Heavily armed, on military vehicles built for battle, firing tear gas and rubber bullets. Again and again, night after night.
This is North Korea right now, man. They cannot do this. This is not North County anymore.
The so-called militarization of local police began several decades ago with the first SWAT teams. Now hundreds of police departments use them routinely on drug raids and to control large crowds like the ones in Ferguson.
It's a powder keg.
Ferguson Police Chief Tom Jackson says law enforcement is reevaluating its use of this approach and will try to be more responsive to the community, though he defended the repeated use of tear gas.
Let's go. I'm working on it.
And arrests of journalists and nonviolent protesters. Take us inside some of those decisions, please.
Well, those decisions were made by the tactical commanders on the ground, and it was based on the threat of violence. If individuals are in a crowd that's attacking the police, they need to get out of that crowd.
Lucky it wasn't one of them Johnson boys.
They received verbal abuses all day long.
Last night, News 4 photojournalist Scott Thomas reported that the police tactical units showed restraint after being repeatedly taunted by some protesters who were blocking a public road and throwing rocks and bottles at officers. But the images of a war zone in the small Missouri town are hard to shake. Today, the most influential government leaders from our region insisted that things needed to change.
I think that last night the militarization of the response became more of the problem than any solution. I think it escalated the situation. It didn't de-escalate the situation.
But just because the cops as soldiers approach is being played down, it doesn't mean the deeper problems will go away.
They've acted like an occupying force for years.
St. Louis University professor Norm White says the militarization of police and their role in Ferguson is a dramatic ramping up of the bully-like policing that poor, crime-plagued communities have complained about for many years.
People are angry when they see that the police have come in there as an occupying force and calling it a war zone. So they're reacting. It's kind of a one-upsmanship, and I don't know where we go from there. I don't know that you're going to stop that.
I am extremely surprised no one shot a police officer. What people don't see down on the crowd is all the threats we were getting every day from people. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your family.
On that first Sunday night, the day after Mike Brown was killed, Caravella says a few dozen cops were outnumbered by hundreds of demonstrators. The officers heard gunshots and became targets.
As soon as we arrived, we started getting rocks, bottles thrown at us, and we were not prepared for that.
Caravella says tear gas used by St. Louis City Police broke up the crowd and protected the cops.
I was thinking that some of us might not make it out okay.
The next night, the police were better prepared, and after officers say more gunshots were fired at them, more bottles and rocks hurled in their direction, they decided to fire more tear gas into the crowd that refused to move.
It's the safest means that we can disperse a crowd, because if we don't have that, that means we have to go into the crowd.
He says the decision to use tear gas must be made by an officer on the scene with the rank captain or higher. He says one of the pivotal points in the police response was when St. Louis Police Chief Sam Dotson removed city SWAT teams, then criticized the operation, even though Dotson wasn't there for the first two nights. Caravella says many cops in Ferguson resented it.
It signaled that I think politics were beginning to exert a lot of pressure on commanders to make decisions that maybe aren't tactically sound, but are politically sound.
One of Caravella's scariest moments was captured in this video. With bullets flying, Caravella and other officers checked on the condition of journalists and then helped them get out. Caravella told me the mood in the community seemed to calm when State Police Captain Ron Johnson took command and there was a night of peace. But the violence quickly returned, and under Johnson's command, police returned to tear gas as well. Caravella says one of the constants of the demonstrations were the peaceful protesters who worked to calm emotions and protect police.
There was people in the crowd that were helping the community. There was pastors and community leaders, and they were doing an amazing job putting their lives on the line to try and keep those people away.
Under fire for taking advantage of mostly low-income black residents, Ferguson Municipal Court was back in session today, and News 4 Investigates was there. Ferguson City Court has made changes, getting rid of some fees and automatic arrest warrants issued for failing to show up to court for minor traffic cases.
But even after more than 2 months of protests, some things have not changed. News 4 Investigates' Craig Cheatham spent the day in court.
Sharon and Steve, last year the city of Ferguson collected $2.6 million in fines and fees from thousands of residents. It was the city's second biggest source of money.
Do you want time to hire an attorney, or do you want me to set this for trial now?
In Ferguson Municipal Court, the docket is dominated by traffic violations and minor drug cases.
It was continued November 25th. She'll give a reminder, okay?
LaRon Sladen says he's still dealing with a 5-year-old traffic case because he's been bouncing from job to job and has to make tough choices about what bills he should pay first.
You have to pay what you need to pay at home prior to paying what you need to pay for the courts. So if I had to choose, I'm paying my bills compared to paying my court fees.
It's a common struggle. Cases that can include a half-dozen citations for one traffic stop can quickly add up to thousands of dollars for some defendants, who often fail to show up in court because they fall behind on their bills, then have warrants issued for their arrest because they fail to appear in court. That happened to Mr. Sladen.
A person can't afford it.
Ferguson and other communities in North St. Louis County have been widely criticized for collecting so much money through fines and court fees. Last year, Ferguson, a city of 21,000, issued nearly 33,000 warrants for nonviolent offenses. Many of them were for traffic cases like LaRon Sladen's.
We're not looking to reach into their pocket. We're not looking to give everybody convictions. That's not the purpose of this court or any court.
What is the purpose of this court?
To see that the laws are enforced fair and reasonably to everybody, regardless of race or creed or whatever, you know.
Today in Ferguson's court, we noticed something else, that all 17 of the city court employees were white. The judge, the 3 prosecutors, the cops, and the clerks. Nearly 9 out of 10 defendants were black.
Well, I think it sends a bad signal. I agree with you totally on that.
Municipal Court Judge Ron Brockmeyer says Ferguson has become a more sensitive court, eliminating some fees and no longer issuing warrants for people who fail to appear in court for minor cases. But we wondered how a community could go through this and still not seem to understand the signals received by many residents of a mostly black city when they see this.
We do have black officers that are in our court. There's just none in here today. And we used to have a black clerk, but she became a black officer, so we did have a black clerk who used to sit up there, but she's now a black officer.
It's a very strong first impression.
Yeah, it is. I don't really want to touch on that subject, but no, I don't want to talk about that.
Do people in the community talk much about it?
Of course. I mean, every day.
The public defender group Arch City Defenders identified 3 North St. Louis County municipal courts, Ferguson, Florissant, and Bell Ridge, as chronic offenders at violating fundamental rights of the poor and undermining public confidence in the judicial system. Ron Brockmeyer, the judge in Ferguson and Breckenridge Hills, is also the prosecutor in Florissant, Delwood, and Bonita Park. He insists all of the courtrooms where he practices for municipal courts are fair. Craig Cheatham, News 4.
How does a gun case with an allegedly uncooperative suspect get reduced to littering?
That case is part of our investigation of Ferguson's municipal court. Now, last night we told you the court raised $2.6 million last year and issued nearly 33,000 warrants, mostly for failing to appear in court for traffic violations. Tonight, News 4 Investigates Craig Cheatham digs into one emotional case.
Stephen Sharon, Melvin Lands was charged with unlawful use of a weapon, resisting arrest, and other charges that made his encounter with police seem pretty serious. He was arrested and jailed. So why does a case like that get reduced to littering? That's right, littering.
I find it appalling that these guys can call themselves police officers and doing the stuff that they're doing. It's ridiculous to me.
Melvin Lands says his nightmare with Ferguson Police began 3 years ago when he was sitting in his SUV at a mini-mart near the intersection of Harvey and Airport Roads. His wife and another woman were having an argument. Then, according to a Ferguson Police report, Lands' wife tried to punch him. An officer approached the car.
I didn't disrespect him in any kind of way, shape, or form.
The officer asked what was going on, then requested Lands' driver's license. Lands says he asked why the officer needed it and rolled up his window.
I just asked one single question, and because of that, for the next 3 days, my life was pure hell.
The officer ordered him out of the vehicle and opened the door. Police say they saw a gun in the car, prompting one cop to hit Lands and try to take him down. Because Lands is 6'6" and over 300 pounds, the officer said he had to taser Lands to get him on the ground. But Lands told us he was repeatedly tasered, even though he never fought back.
The first time he tased me, it was over my heart. While he was tasing me over my heart, he grabbed my arm and snatched me out on the ground. As soon as I hit the ground, another officer tased me in the stomach, and he tased me over my kidneys. And he held it on there for a while, and to the point I was just just writhing in pain.
Then, facing 8 separate charges, including unlawful use of a weapon, failure to obey, and failure to wear a seatbelt, Land says he was taken to jail. Even though he uses 20 different medications and needs a treatment to help him sleep, Lands told me the jail staff didn't give him his medications when he needed them.
They went out of their ways to torture me and make my life as miserable as they could.
He says he was in jail for 3 days. After he hired an attorney, the city attorney agreed to reduce the charges to littering. He has not sued the city of Ferguson.
They still said, well, we're going to get some money out of this guy. So that's when they amended everything to littering. It totaled up to over $1,400.
$1,400?
Yes.
For littering?
For littering.
Well, did you have this when you got the ticket?
Ron Brockmeyer is the Ferguson Municipal Court judge.
Like I said, I won't talk about a case that's open or closed, and I don't know the circumstances, but the prosecutors have been here for a long time, and I'm sure they had a great reason why they did whatever they did.
City Attorney Stephanie Carr refused to explain why the charges were reduced to littering.
People consistently express concerns stemming from specific alleged incidents, from general policing practices, and from the lack of diversity on the Ferguson police force.
Under Attorney General Eric Holder, the Department of Justice is investigating the policies and practices of the Ferguson Police Department. The probe is examining police searches and arrests, use of force, the treatment of inmates at the Ferguson jail, and how cases are handled in Ferguson Municipal Court. All issues raised in the one case of Melvin Lands, convicted of littering.
Only in America. Only in Ferguson, Missouri.
We requested a copy of Melvin Land's case file several weeks ago, and back then we told the Ferguson City Attorney we wanted to know why the case specifically was reduced to littering. We also asked other questions about the case as well. 5 days ago, we provided the city attorney with a list of questions about the case, including, again, why was it amended to littering? Yesterday, the city attorney refused to be interviewed, but she said she would answer our questions in an email today. We are still waiting for her response. Craig Cheatham, News 4. Tuesday, August 12th, the third consecutive night of chaos in Ferguson. The protests were fueled by the only eyewitness accounts known to the public, that Officer Darren Wilson confronted Mike Brown and Dorian Johnson for jaywalking. There was a tussle at Wilson's car, but at the end, Johnson said Brown surrendered. Hands up, don't shoot. But he said Wilson gunned him down anyway.
Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot!
Hands up, don't shoot became a powerful slogan that was used at protests around the world. But on the same day Wilson shot and killed Brown, the now public St. Louis County Police investigation reveals that witnesses who lived in the Canfield Green apartments were already defending the actions of Officer Wilson. 2 witnesses interviewed together told police they were worried about retaliation. One of them began crying. According to police, they heard what sounded like a gunshot, then saw Brown moving quickly toward the officer, then more gunshots. A third witness said the officer was in the right and did what he had to do. That night, detectives saw the surveillance video showing Brown and Johnson at a convenience store. The clerk said Brown grabbed cigarillos, then shoved him.
We wasn't committing any crime, bringing no harm to nobody, but my friend was murdered in cold blood.
Detectives recognized Johnson from one of the interviews the day of the shooting. They began looking for him, but the police report says Johnson was unavailable for an interview until Wednesday, when he was accompanied by at least 5 people, including 2 attorneys. It's unclear what Johnson told them that day. Unlike witnesses who defended Officer Wilson's actions, the witnesses who supported Johnson's versions were not identifiable in the heavily redacted 200-page police report. The report also shows that a Ferguson police sergeant told Officer Wilson to leave Canfield after the shooting and drive back to the police department, where Wilson testified that he washed blood off his hands and entered his own gun into evidence. Experts say those were both violations of standard police protocol. The police report also shows that unlike other witnesses, Officer Wilson's interview the day of the shooting was not recorded. While this was happening during that first volatile week after Mike Brown's killing, we never knew the details of what police were learning from some witnesses. Witnesses that would make the investigation far more complicated and in the end help create the doubt that was needed to not indict Darren Wilson.